in Porto Gravvura. Maybe you'd want to know how I met Elise. When I was 17 and all over innocent, I moved to Porto Gravvura for a maths program, a residency. They told us to call it that, at the university there. I had never been out of the country before. I'd never been to a desert, or not a real one, not for any appreciable stretch of time. And time appreciably stretched, past any past imagined elastic capacity. By the end of the first week, after orientation and languages, the seconds had been drawn so wide I could have climbed through one. Eventually, I did. I walked endlessly. In the sudden cool each evening, after the sun, failing to find any place in the dried-out scape to store its warmth, had sailed on to wester climes, I would walk up, away from the city centre, into the skirting surround, through the artificial hills of the law school campus, under a fence at the edge of the medical parking lot, and out of sight. When I think back on it, I have a hard time reconstructing what I was after in those neglected ditches. Supposedly people lived out there sometimes, in caves and tents, glimpsed pitched in the strange rushes that choked the deepest parts of the carved wash, where the water must once have run and now formed an implied layer of subsurface residue. Shepherds, castaways, dropouts and criminals, all beyond the city walls. But I didn't want to see them. I was afraid of them. It was enough to avoid the other residents in my cohort. I felt no need to leave. So I wandered between fence and wall in a system of unpopulated ravines. Loose trees, olive and almond, grew among all the unmarked trash there then. I remember this funny thing. They didn't blossom in time with their city kin, but flowered inexplicably. Clusters of cream and rose white, each after their own personal intercalations. After 2 weeks of work, all funding for the math program disappeared. This was 2015 in Porto Gravvura, so right at the beginning of synthesis. CIA everywhere, DGSE, NMRI, every intelligence you can imagine, and everything was extremely disturbed and chaotic. Maybe you know the old army game? Nothing would be where you left it. Every business moved buildings. Reallocations, new assignments, new lives and fates. Mine, it turned out, was to be transferred into the poetry program. This is how I met Elise. She said she was there to study systems of power distribution in Porto Gravvura. I thought she meant it in a critical sense, the operation of some particular hierarchy or the strategy, and it would have been worth studying, that the authorities in Porto Gravvura had for securing their authority. It turned out she meant it literally. Systems for the transmission and transformation of power. She snuck into substations. She made maps. She followed power lines, walking for hours and hours against the current, away from the city, through the wall and out. I worked up the courage, asked to come, and came. We went through the wall and far into the countryside, towards some larger towers. There's a difference, she explained. These big ones transmit at a very high voltage. As we came underneath, she bade me listen to their buzz. Clicking accelerated to a tone, like the crackling of wood fire at speed. At high voltages, she said, the air around the wire can break and start to conduct. On such special occasions like name days, air turns to plasma and glows at frequency structural to some alternating orbital. Elise, because she came from nowhere interesting, called this witch fire. We camped out that night waiting for it, knowing it wouldn't come. I told her I believed her anyway, which was true. Later on, I said, I'll see something similar in the fisheries and call you when I get to shore. She squinted at me, as though I had said something I didn't mean or meant to say something I hadn't. I knew she was right, and I resolved to think about what that might be. With no humidity and no clouds, nothing obstructed the moonlight. It fell fluorescent over the silver valley, clean on every magic polished desert surface. We were quiet. We surveyed the open. The cities I grew up in terminate in a long process of suburbs, exurbs, graveyards, switchyards, and prison complexes, with the older graveyards, switchyards, and prison complexes always ending up enclosed by outward development. Even absent a clear boundary, there is nothing ambiguous in that situation. Everywhere there is a plain and sensible gradient, a direction where there is more city and a direction where there is less. Porto Gravvura, on the other hand, has a wall. Past the wall, there is no city. There is scree and grassland, depending on the pitch, and there is the highway. Along that highway, more power lines. Once, out with Elise, with a view like this one, I told her they looked like needles, so many threaded needles. Or something you'd see on the procession to Calvary, if the dead really did have ways of communicating with each other, like thieves can't. Suspended between each executed type and connecting pulleys, gate to gate by Curlian relay. Elise was not interested in this experiment of mine. She made me look closely at the poles along the highway. I squinted. Here's the other side of the difference, she said. The low voltage lines. These reach you. They won't ionize the air. They run right out of your bedroom window, are pinned in zigzags across the alleyways, dive and bundle. They suffer endless transformations. You should appreciate them as they are. She looked at me sternly as she said that. I nodded. That Elise, who was older and smarter than me, had turned even a part of her attention towards my life, and the underdeveloped project it represented was unbearably intense. It reorganized and reoriented me, even as a leached resource will flow to and develop potential in some stray whatever. Doesn't matter, that's not the point. She said she was going to leave 2 weeks early, even that Sunday. I had a strong and uncomplicated sense that I should tell her something before then, but I wasn't sure yet what. I spent the afternoon stalking a shepherd out in the area, under yet another cloudless sky. Daylight in Porto Gravvura was so even and unchanging that all the pictures we took there, when I look at them now, seem to have been taken over the course of a single day. The flock bunched and spread so naturally, as if all were lashed by flexible metal bands to the same invisible point, suspended somewhere central overhead. This, I think, was the point envisioned and controlled by the shepherd through some almost invisible kinesic telegraphy. The pastor could discharge intention, rustle tartar lambs, corpuscent lace patterns and chance apparitions, all so far as in him lay. How does passion work on a body? What about mine on mine? I thought Elise might appreciate a physical metaphor. We were sitting under the wall. I turned away and spoke even as I was minded. I think you are a conduit, I said. You found some common kind from here to there, one terminal on each side of the gap, and everything or most everything on one side, I'm not sure which. And then me, entering the region of expanded conduction, I'm like, something happens to... Wait. I lost track of my figure and stopped to think. She looked pained. It's not a metaphor to me, she said. The power lines, the transformers, the maps I make, it really is that way. That's how power comes to the city. What you're talking about is a separate mechanism. What good does it do to talk about one in terms of the other? Doesn't it confuse you? You mix yourself up. You mix yourself with other things until you're all diluted and you can't see what you wanted anymore. What's the good of that? to get out of wanting something? If you've something to say to me, say it directly. Because tomorrow I'm leaving and then I'm gone. All right, I said. And I don't remember anything that happened between then and now.